used to be something Canada actually led on, not bragged about, not assumed, but it was measured, counted, and then we were ranked under Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Remember those golden days? Canada was consistently ranked as one of the top 10 freest countries on the face of the earth. In some years, we were ranked as high as 6th. That puts us in the same league as Switzerland, New Zealand, and the Nordic countries. Not just better than average when it came to freedom, but we were exceptional. And that's not the conservative viewpoint. That's what the data said. The Human Freedom Index looks at dozens of indicators: rule of law, freedom of expression, freedom of association, economic liberty, property rights, regulatory burden, and freedom of movement. It's all the unglamorous stuff that actually determines whether you live freely or just feel polite while being managed to death. Now, back then, back in the before times, before 2015, Canada scored high across the board: strong civil liberties, predictable, reliable courts, a relatively restrained regulatory state, governments that, when they overreached, were checked by Parliament, by courts, and then finally the voters. Freedom was the default setting in Canada. As Prime Minister Diefenbaker said, Parliament is more than procedure. It's the custodian of the nation's freedom. Fast forward to now, Parliament is the biggest threat to our freedom, not freedom's protector. Canada no longer cracks the top 10. In the most recent Human Freedom Index, we're 12th. Still better than most of the world, sure, but no longer a leader, no longer setting the standard. We're slipping slowly and sometimes quickly, but absolutely unmistakably out of the top tier the longer the Liberals remain in charge of this country. And that didn't happen by accident. This index isn't just measuring laws on paper. It measures how governments behave when they're pressured, how they respond to dissent, how comfortable and frankly how quickly they are using force, regulation, and coercion to get compliance out of the citizens. Which brings us to the moment that changed everything. February 2022. You know what I'm talking about. The Freedom Convoy. Whatever you think of that protest, and people are allowed to think different things in a free country for now, what happened next marked a hard break from the Canada of the Harper era. For the first time in Canadian history, the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act against its own citizens during a non-violent protest. We didn't see terrorism. There was no armed insurrection. There was not a foreign invasion. It was truckers, supporters, families, and ordinary Canadians who just wanted their freedom back. And the response wasn't just police action, and it definitely was that, don't get me wrong. But it was also financial warfare. Bank accounts were frozen without warrants. Donations were flagged. Credit denied. People who never set foot in Ottawa to be part of the protest were suddenly locked out of their own money. Insurance threatened. Tow trucks commandeered. Protests treated as a national security threat. Under Stephen Harper, emergency powers were treated like a fire alarm behind glass. Break only if civilization is actually on fire. And he didn't break that glass. Not even once. In post-convoy Canada, that glass is smashed. And here's the thing that matters for freedom rankings. Precedent. Because once a government shows it's willing to freeze bank accounts to suppress protest, every citizen learns something important. Your rights are conditional, so shut up. Your rights then exist at the pleasure of the state. Compliance is rewarded, dissent is punished, but it doesn't stop there, because if you want to understand why freedom rankings slip, you have to look at what happened next. And during all of that, I should say. It was the censorship architecture. Silence the people before they ever organize again. In the Harper era, the government didn't build an entire regulatory regime around what Canadians can see, share, and monetize online. There were debates, sure, but the basic premise held. The internet was messy, loud, and decentralized, and Canadians could speak without having their visibility managed by regulators. It was the town square, for better or for worse. Today, Ottawa has pushed a stack of laws that move Canada toward a system where the state, directly or indirectly, sets the rules for what speech gets amplified, what gets demoted, and which voices get rewarded. The Liberals control the old media with subsidies and incentives. So the new media that cannot be bought or paid off, well, they have to be controlled by being muzzled and downranked. First, it was Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, sold as a cultural policy, but functionally giving the CRTC more control over what content is promoted and discoverable online. When the state gets a lever over what gets surfaced and what gets buried, that's not neutral. That's power over the information that you consume. Then there was Bill C-18, the Online News Act, pitched as making big tech pay their fair share every time a Canadian did a news outlet a favor by sharing their content. But the predictable outcome was platforms restricting or blocking news links in Canada. Whatever side you're on here, the result was less access, less distribution, and more gatekeeping. And it's ordinary Canadians who get stuck with the smaller information diet, and the ad dollars dried up for the very outlets this scheme was designed to help. And now we've got the next round, of course. Proposals and bills aimed at expanding harmful content enforcement and hate speech regimes. Always with the same sales pitch. It's just to protect people. It'll only hit the bad guys. But this time, it may criminalize what is said in our own churches. The definition of bad guy expands every time politics changes hands or the dissent gets louder. That's the pattern. The state doesn't need to outlaw speech outright. It just needs to regulate the pipes, the platforms, the payment processors, the discoverability algorithms, the licensing regimes, until speech is technically legal but practically punished, and more often than not even worthwhile. That's how a modern Western democracy tightens control without ever admitting it's tightening control. When people ask what changed, it's not one thing, it's a combination of everything. Emergency powers get normalized, financial punishment is used against dissent, regulatory censorship layered over the digital public square, gatekeeping disguised as safety, culture, fairness. Under Harper, protests were loud and annoying, and they were everywhere, against pipelines and financial transparency, on Indigenous reserves, you name it. But it was always understood that these protests, however wrong they were in their cause, they were legitimate. Today, protest is treated as a threat to national security. Under Harper, banks were just banks, not enforcement arms of the state in some sort of social credit scheme. Today, financial access can be just switched off at a press conference by some cackling marm of an MP. Under Harper, the government didn't try to manage the information ecosystem like a utility. Today, it's building the scaffolding to do exactly that, to you and to us. And yes, freedom has declined globally. The index shows almost 90% of the world's population has seen freedom decline in recent years, but Canada used to resist that trend. In fact, we used to lead the wave against it. Now we're drifting with it. Canada isn't unfree exactly, but it is less free than it was, and pretending otherwise is how decline becomes permanent. Freedom doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes through justification, through emergencies, through just this once, for safety, for health, for civic duty, whatever, through governments discovering how much control they can exercise without consequences, and then pinpointing exactly who will be lazy enough to go along to get along. And boy, we saw that in spades, didn't we? The Harper-era Canada trusted citizens with freedom. The current Carney Canada manages us into silence. And when a country goes from trusting its people to managing them, the rankings don't lie, even when politicians do. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunry. To send a message to the Carney government that our pastors and priests and pulpits will not be censored at the hands of the state, please go to protectreligiousfreedom.ca.